Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com. Fernando Nikolic, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Happy to be here.
So good to have you, man. It's been a long time coming, and it's great to have you on the show finally. By way of a quick introduction, you are the lead of marketing and communications at Blockstream, which is a well-known Bitcoin infrastructure company. And today, we've been talking about doing this episode for some time. We were originally going to talk about Javier Milei when he was initially elected. It's been how long now? 4 months since he was elected?
Yeah, it was late October. So,
So 5 months, 4 or 5 months. And we are going to discuss Mr. Milei today, what he's done in the first 4 or 5 months of his presidency, maybe some of the challenges he faces and some other context surrounding that. But to start, you've been doing some media research work on the perception of Bitcoin in the eyes of mainstream media. And given that we are recording this, by the way, on March 11th, and Bitcoin just broke we're officially in a Bitcoin bull market now. I guess if you're not inflation adjusting the dollars, the US dollar price, we might still not be if you did inflation adjusted. But we broke $70,000 at 3:30 a.m. this morning. How have you been seeing Bitcoin perceived in mainstream media, and how do you think that perception is changing or will change?
Yeah, sure. By the way, nobody was checking like inflation adjusted all-time highs back in 2021. We were just like enjoying the memes and having fun and not, so let's just do the same and just like celebrate and pat ourselves on the back because we are definitely in a bull market. And I think a lot of people are starting to not only understand Bitcoin in a new way, but they're also like changing a lot of minds. And I think that's well reflected in the way that the mainstream media is or has covered Bitcoin lately. Like you said, through my work. So I run a media research firm called Bitcoin Perception, where I basically take 40 of the largest mainstream media outlets around the world, and every time they cover Bitcoin, I track that. So I gather all the data and I do weekly reports through bitcoinperception.com. And as I started that maybe 5 months ago now at this point. And since I started, usually like towards the end of last year, I started seeing a shift in the narrative. Obviously, this was based on the rumors that an ETF was going to be approved and etc. But it wasn't just about the ETF that this narrative shift was changing. There were stuff like all of a sudden these reporters are talking about the halving and trying to understand what that's all about and going into the technicalities of it. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And then just on a more like high level stuff, like outlets that have historically been covering Bitcoin in a very negative or even hostile way, I would say. Now they have started to change their tune a little bit. Now they're a little bit more balanced all of a sudden. The most hostile outlets aren't necessarily, the pendulum hasn't swung completely and now they're all positive. But at the minimum, they're like balanced all of a sudden. And that's very funny to see. And then also, I think, a lot of Bitcoiners, depending on how long you've been in the space, but the longer you've been in the space, the more of a negative attitude you've had with the MSM, I think, in general. Because negative stories, they have longer shelf life, right? Those are the things that you remember. So over time, I think a lot of Bitcoiners have their own perception of the mainstream media, and it's all negative. But I'm here to tell you, after these 5 months, and I'm also collecting data all the way back from January 1st, 2018. There's a lot of new reporters that are coming into these outlets that are starting to write about Bitcoin, and the way they are writing about it, they are really like they are more naturally curious. They're not coming in with an agenda or trying to only write hit pieces or whatever. They are truly asking genuine questions, which is very healthy, I think. So it's kind of like the same way new Bitcoiners are coming into Bitcoin. New reporters are also coming into Bitcoin for each cycle. So it's a very interesting trend. I think there's a lot of positive change. Obviously, there's still, the likes of the Daily Mail, the Guardian, Financial Times. They're still the usual suspects that are really like bad and they really don't budge, even though, price is where it's at and adoption is where it's at. And you have all the signals. I mean, all the science in front of you that, this is Bitcoin is now mainstream and things are changing, and they still don't want to change their narrative. But still, I see outlets that are now specializing in the way they understanding Bitcoin. You have the financial outlets. They see Bitcoin from like a more financial investment angle. You have more like right-leaning, the Fox News, the Fox businesses of the world. They are more interested in mining in terms of an industry, what that can do for U.S. workforce. So there are just little pockets within the mainstream media that are starting to be born, where they cover Bitcoin in different ways, and they're actually more curious than ever. And I really think that's great. That goes to show like all the work that we have all been collectively doing is working. It's a slow-moving train, but it's definitely moving the needle a little bit.
That is exciting. Yeah. Obviously, Bitcoiners have been talking about Bitcoin until they're blue in the face for years, and all of our significant others probably hate us for talking about it. But it does create a ripple effect, apparently, right? You start to hear these more intelligent questions, as you were saying. I also start to notice certain phrases being used just about Bitcoin. The halving obviously is one that you mentioned. Phrases like HODL start to become more commonly known. Even phrases not directly related or concepts not related to Bitcoin, like fiat currency. The emergence of Bitcoin has popularized the concept of fiat currency in the minds of many people, I've noticed. You mentioned this, well, you started tracking this on Bitcoin Perception, you said about 5 months ago, which was around the same time the Bitcoin ETFs were starting to be rumored that they were going to get approved.
Yeah. Well,
did you see the tide change as a result of that rumor? And then what has it been like during the actual launch of the ETFs?
Yeah. So the funny thing is like I said, like I'm still looking through data from as early as the beginning of 2018. And these ETF rumors have been kind of like going on for a while. I think it was the OWASP twins. They filed the first When was that? The first ETF? I think they did it back in 2013, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yeah.
Ever since that first touch point has always been like an ETF rumor coming about
Mhm.
in a cyclical way. But from 2018 to up to today, any ETF mention was strictly negative in terms of like, oh, they got shut down once again
Mhm.
because Bitcoin is not good for humanity. That was
Mhm.
basically the only stories. Before the end of last year, though, things started to definitely change in the way they they were talking about it, but that was only like, hot rumors. This is about to happen, and kind of like hyping up to it. It was strictly positive. I think I was looking through the dashboard yesterday, looking at ETF related mentions, and I think 9% of the total coverage was negative.
Mhm.
Everything else was either positive or balanced. So it was like negative, positive. It was a positive approach that the majority of the mainstream media had towards the rumors. But after it got approved and the news were official, uh, first of all, there was never more coverage about Bitcoin on that day. I think it was January 10th or 11th.
Mhm.
Um, there's no one day so far in the data that I've tracked from 2018 to even today when the price is breaking new all-time highs. It's never been more mention about Bitcoin on that day.
Mhm.
And it was mostly positive, but one thing that was very peculiar, and you were mentioning a couple of topics and terms that has been covered by these journalists for the first time, where custodianship was also a new thing
Mhm.
that popped up right after the ETF got approved. And the angle that they spun was, hey, ETF is a single custodian, as a single
Mhm.
custodian failure. I mean, wouldn't you rather have Bitcoin in a hardware wallet? And I couldn't believe when I read that. Like, how
Mhm.
here we have the usual Bitcoin skeptics saying that an ETF is not cypherpunk enough, literally in those words, and saying, no, we need to look at hardware wallet options, and you need to do self custody now. The ETF is too risky. And I thought
Mhm.
that was funny because, hey, man, yeah, I understand you're probably tasked with writing something negative about the ETF approval, but in the process of that, you're advocating for like sound Bitcoin things. And yeah, it's funny to see. But yeah, the TLDR on that is the ETF was mostly positively welcomed, mostly by like financial
Mhm.
outlets and reporters. But the fact that it triggered like where's the cypherpunk ethos and you self custody, that was just too funny for me. So that was very interesting to see.
That is so cool. Yeah, it's almost like things you wouldn't believe 5 years ago. You wouldn't believe this, right? It's happened so quick. It's incredible. I've also since the ETFs launched, obviously the guys selling the ETFs are now all huge Bitcoin bulls. Larry Fink was on TV the other day saying that Bitcoin is bigger than any government. How much of that do you think is contributing to the shift in media coverage, and that just that now that certain people are aligned with it financially, that may also have interest in some of these mainstream media outlets, that they start to tilt the narrative in a more positive direction?
I mean, I think Larry Fink, one of his most famous quotes back in 2017 or 18 was that Bitcoin was an index for money laundering. So if you wanted to follow the money laundering index, look no further than the Bitcoin price. That was Larry Fink himself 5 years ago. I think, though, to answer your question, like the rabbit hole is very similar for most people.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would say 9 times out of 10, people have a negative reaction the first time they hear about Bitcoin, and I don't know why. Maybe it's a result of reading these headlines and believing in the narratives that's
Mm-hmm.
dominant. But then you kind of like start looking at um, alternative sources and start doing some, I don't know, some autodidactical research and trying to just educate yourself at your own pace. And then matter of time, once you start doing that, it's a matter of time before it clicks in your head.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should be, with Bitcoiners, we're very quick to talk smack on Twitter and stuff like that for noobs or people asking questions or saying any statements on Twitter, and we were happy to dunk on people like that. But I think honestly, let's show some solidarity to these people. They're kind of like going through the same journey we went through. I don't know how many cycles back, right?
Yeah.
Just it's a different experience and a different process for everyone. It's a very individual and lone journey, I think. Getting orange pilled. But these are public figures, so we can't be too harsh on the things that they say. It's important that we at least see now that they are changing their minds, and they're getting some sound understanding of what they're talking about when it comes to Bitcoin, at least.
Yeah, good to see them going the right direction. But it is funny how far they've come. But you're right. Many people come far with Bitcoin. I'm kind of convinced the name Bitcoin isn't very helpful. Like when you just first hear about it, doesn't sound like anything important. Bits are small, coins are small. It just sounds insignificant in some way. And then it's something that's so far either outside or at the very edge of the Overton window, right? You're talking about a technology that's disruptive to gold
Mhm.
and central banking. Like these are, the gold is so old, we don't even know why it's money, basically, right? So that's hence the reason this podcast, right? We talk about all that stuff for hours and hours, and it's news to people, even though it's, been happening for 5,000 years, whatever it may be. So good to see perception is shifting, but you mentioned there's a number of outlets that are resistant to these positive shifts in Bitcoin's perception or media coverage. What do you think is going on there? What are the motivations? Do you think we'll see them come around? Is it a certain type of organization that tends to be more resistant? I think you said it sounded more like some traditional financial media outlets that were a little more resistant to Bitcoin still.
Mm. Yeah, and don't be too hard on the Bitcoin name. It could have been worse. We could have been named Ethereum or something like
Yeah.
that. It's not that bad. But the branding
I've come to
challenge,
love it, by the way, but just when at first blush, it sounds very humble, which actually is a good thing, I guess, but maybe not very attention grabbing.
I think the branding of Bitcoin as a own topic is very interesting as well. It's like, how do you push a brand like Bitcoin forward when there's no the usual saying there's no marketing team in Bitcoin and stuff like that. And that's another conversation. To answer your question, I think that there's a lot of when you read the data that I gather, there's a lot of narratives in the unspoken things, if that makes sense. So it's like the fact that a publication like the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal, who should be on top of covering Bitcoin, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying you should, do us a favor and talk positively about Bitcoin, but just have, some negative stuff, some balance, some positive. Just try to cover it, the way the 8th or 7th largest asset in the world deserves, right? Bloomberg is doing it, Forbes is doing it, and there's a lot of other outlets that are doing it. And there's no outlet that has a perfect score. There's too many journalists in places like Bloomberg, so you will see the opinion piece that is very negative. You might see a good opinion piece the same day. But that's what I'm talking about. You should do that. You should try to see it from different angles and have different sentiment on the different things about Bitcoin. But then you look at Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, and if you look at the data, Bitcoin perception, and you just see sheer volume, the fact that they almost don't cover it at all, that says something to me. That is something that is just it's kind of like irresponsible in a way. I think if you specialize in financial news, as the Financial Times do, for your readers, for your audience, you should be able to just bring forth all the different stories, all the different angles that Bitcoin has, the good and the bad. And they chose not to. And that, to me, says a lot, even though you might go to the bitcoinperception.com dashboard and choose Financial Times, and you will see there's very little. I think that speaks in volumes. But then you were asking about how the different outlets are kind of spreading into different segments, or
wondering if there was a a cohort of the outlets that were more resistant. It sounded like you mentioned Wall Street Journal. I know The Economist magazine was
Yeah.
putting out a bunch of negative Bitcoin stuff. It seemed like a lot of these old guard financial publications seemed to be more resistant to Bitcoin. I didn't know if that was the case, but I wanted to ask that.
No, that is actually true. I mean, The Economist, The Guardian, Daily Mail, mostly the British financial
Mm-hmm.
outlets, like those three, they are very bad, and they seem right now, even though all the latest ETF news and all the price action news, they seem to not budge. And I've in my work at Blockstream, I deal with these outlets as well. When they want to interview certain blog streamers or they want to feature us in a certain way, I do speak with the editorial desk and I try to find out, like, okay, what are you working on? What's the story that you're trying to tell? And it's not a lot of good stuff that is
Mm-hmm.
coming out of those interactions. And so they are definitely like on the negative side, but I think outlets like Wall Street Journal and more specifically reporters like Vicky Wong,
Mm-hmm.
she's like awesome. She writes really good stuff. Bloomberg has always been on top of it, but they have what's interesting with Bloomberg, for example, is there's a reporter called David Pan, who it's kind of like has been written about Bitcoin for a lot of years, but now recently I've kind of like switched to only write about mining, which is interesting to see as well. Because judging by that data, it's kind of like David at one point sat with his editor and got tasked with the job of you are now covering Bitcoin mining stories for
Mm-hmm.
Bloomberg. And that is very cool that they are like reporters are getting these niche projects to cover. I think that's interesting. And Reuters, to talk about like the more like news outlets, more mainstream news outlets, Reuters are pretty good. They're balanced. You have reports like Hannah Lang, there's doing a good job. So it's like pockets of like you have to like follow individual reporters within these bigger outlets to really see, okay, who is kind of like the one that, let's say, you should send a press release to, or you should reach out with your
Mm-hmm.
story if you're a Bitcoin company or something, because they are genuinely curious, they are covering good stuff. And then on the other side you have like the more like CNBCs, the Barons and stuff like that. You have reporters like Tayana Mashiel and Mackenzie Sigalos, who are like always, you see them in conferences. They're actually traveling to see Bitcoiners and kind of like see how the space
Mm-hmm.
is in real life, which is also pretty cool to see. So yeah,
Yeah.
small pockets, things that are moving and shaking, and I think this is only the beginning. So it's a good thing to be able to track that, you know, right now.
Yeah, it's just occurring to me that it's kind of funny that we can even have this conversation now that there are some media outlets that are positively oriented to Bitcoin and some that are negative, some that are maybe in between, balanced. Because again, if I go back in time 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was almost all negative, right?
Yep.
Almost like definitely over 90%, I would say, in mainstream media. And the other thing that was really, there was a website to this effect. Almost everything in mainstream media about Bitcoin for a time were Bitcoin obituaries, right? They just kept saying Bitcoin was dead or dying or going to die. Are those on the decline now? I haven't checked up on that website in a while. I imagine at some point those have to go away. Are they on the decline?
Uh, I think that there's a lot of Schadenfreude by
Mm.
pundits,
Can you
intellectuals.
define that term? I know what it means vaguely.
Schadenfreude is like
Yes.
the joy of seeing something or someone suffer.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So when Bitcoin, let's say, crashes and corrects with 60, 70% in,
Hmm.
in a cycle, you have all these people coming out of the woodwork saying, ha,
Hmm.
told you so, it's a bubble, it's over, it's dead.
Hmm.
And that might be on Twitter, or you actually see reporters writing that as their headline,
Hmm.
which is, you got to also understand the mainstream media has fallen victim to audience capture,
Yeah.
and they need to do some clickbait stories as well. And these are stories that, fare well. What I do, what is interesting to see now when the price is just pumping so aggressively is kind of like, I don't know. I tell this to myself. I don't know if this is true, but I like to think this is true. It's like the price of Bitcoin is so tearing right now that a lot of reports are being forced to write about it, right? Like, okay, we gotta talk about Bitcoin because it's everyone is talking about it, right? And then they write these articles, and then when you read through the fine line, the headline might say, "Hey, Bitcoin is breaking a new record, whatever." And you might think, okay, this is a positive spin. Once you start reading it, it's they say like stuff like, oh, but it's still used for money laundering. It's still
Mm,
you have nefarious activities linked to this. Oh, Gary Gensler said this about Bitcoin. So it's cool, but it's not great.
mhm.
There's a little bit of like a backhanded comments that you have to read between the lines to actually catch it. But overall, I think there is a generation change. There's a generational shift in terms of like younger reporters coming in and
Yeah.
starting their careers and starting to write. And I think their whole worldview is vastly different from like the old guard.
Mm.
So I think I don't think that these old guard reporters will go anywhere. They will write until they're 70, 80, 90 years old probably. But I think it's interesting just to follow the new ones that come into the space and the stories that they tell. And I think us as Bitcoiners, we should definitely um, reach out to them. Not think that the MSM as one unit is just a monolith of just negative news, but it's actually people that we should reach out to,
Mm.
bring a little bit closer to the fire, because it's kind of like Bitcoin adoption as a whole in general. There's some people that will just never ever be convinced, and you shouldn't spend time. You shouldn't waste time and energy on them.
Yeah.
People anyway. Just carefully select the reporters and the outlets, and see what kind of angle they're interested in, and then if you have something to add to that narrative that they are interested in, like let's say you're a mining company, you should go to Fox News and just tell your story there. Don't waste time trying to pitch your press release to the Guardian, for example. So stuff like that. I think it's just healthy for us moving forward.
Yeah, it's good thoughts there. If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. There's one other thing I want to ask you about. This is a bit of a tangent maybe to just pure media coverage of Bitcoin, but it does have to do with the perception of Bitcoin, I think. One of the things I repeatedly think about is Bitcoin has this perfect issuance schedule, right? Like we know how much Bitcoin is in existence today and how much Bitcoin will be in existence all the way until 21 million. The 21 millionth Bitcoin is mined in the year 2140, I think, somewhere around then. So that it has this perfect information quality to it, right? We know with perfect certainty what the supply is and will be over time. And historically, the price action has mapped on quite nicely to the halving schedule. So every 4 years when the supply issuance contracts by 50%, the price tends to pump roughly 500 days after that. It may have changed some. I haven't looked at the data in a couple of years, but that's what it used to be. And the thing that I keep thinking about is how long, if that pattern continues to hold, how long is it before people start to just front run Bitcoin? Like you just perceive, oh, well, it's repeated this halving price pump pattern so many times. I can see the halving schedule all the way out to the year 2140. How about I just increase my position now because it's so obvious in a way? And then that very thinking actually makes Bitcoin somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy that people starting to buy it actually do pump the price and so on and so forth. So I just want to, it's a bit more of a philosophical thing, but this idea that we know an asset that has this perfect information quality to its supply schedule, do you think that will have an impact on the perception of Bitcoin over time?
That's a great question. I think there's a huge difference between watching the information in a chart, for example, and then actually living through each cycle as a bag holder, as having skin in the game. I think it's easy for you and I to say this because we have gone through a couple of cycles already, so we know this very close to heart. But then Bitcoin is very cyclical, just like life itself. And experiences that you go through life just happens at certain stages in your life, and you might be ready for that experience. You might be mature enough or not. So there's a lot of people that will just go in and out of Bitcoin in one cycle alone and never look back and say, I didn't like it. I don't care about it.
Yeah.
But those who stay, yeah, you need to give them time. And I think a growing cohort of people will understand the concept you just laid down. But I think we're still so early, in terms of just like general adoption and just people sticking around for long enough to understand these concepts, which to me is pretty deep, right? Like, okay, you have a predictable issuance. Just the concept alone of that, when you have people saying, majority of people saying, well, in a crisis, you need to print more money, right? Just to get them off of that horse takes a lot of unlearning.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the thing about time and this like just slowly moving in that direction and trying to bring as many people with you on that journey. But we're still so early. I don't want to like sound like a living meme, but we're so early still. Yeah. It's just going to take a lot of time.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I summarized that idea in a tweet yesterday, and I said Bitcoin will never stop making headlines because its supply issuance schedule never misses deadlines. And it's kind of the gist of what makes Bitcoin so valuable, right? Is that it's just so perfectly predictable and hard to break, hard to take kind of thing. And Yeah, it's a big idea. It will take a lot of time. And I guess the other thing, the quote I always like on this was from Pascal. He said that science advances from funeral to funeral. So it's easy to look around right now and be like, oh, these people don't get it. Like, who's ever going to get it? But what you don't see is old generations dying off, new generations coming up. All new generations now are internet natives, basically. I think these ideas are gonna permeate people, right? I mean, yeah, I just can't imagine a kid born today like just holding his savings in fiat currency when he's 30, 40, 50 years old, right? Like the idea will be so deeply ingrained at that point.
Right.
I have a hard time imagining the fiat scam being as successful as it is today.
Yeah, and to be honest, this is you're talking about culture change here,
Yeah.
and those changes, they run pretty deep. They can be accelerated by crises. So, I don't want to sound too black pilled, but if you want to accelerate these things and have more people understand this quicker,
Hmm.
well, you need to hope that the world becomes a worse place to live in.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you
Yeah.
need to have more censorship, more authoritarian regimes coming to power. You need to have all of that, accelerate that, and I think the case for Bitcoin will become obvious for more and
Yes.
more.
Yeah.
But you don't want that.
Yeah, of course.
And also I think it's and then if you want to go the slow route, so you're basically trying to shatter an entire worldview for every person that you're trying to convince, right? In a way,
Hmm. Hmm.
you need you need to get to the point where you have to say to yourself, "Hey, a lot of the things that I've been told throughout my life, it's not working the way they're promoted."
Hmm.
That takes a lot of maturity. You need to
Hmm.
really confident in yourself to be able
Yeah.
to admit that to yourself, like, shit, I messed up and I believed in the wrong things.
Yeah.
So that's
Which is a
that's a
slight deconstruction of your identity, right? It's your
right.
world. You are your worldview to some extent. And so to be humble enough to say, hey, I was wrong, you have to
Right.
break down your identity and rebuild it. And that's hard to do.
And culture change is, to me at least, is the collective change of a lot of people's individual identity at
Yeah.
once.
Yeah.
If it goes fast enough and if it's compressed to a location, it's very easy to point at it and say, "Hey, this happened during this generation in this place," and it's a culture shift that is very easy to, let's say, write an article about.
Yeah.
But then you have, all these things are happening on the internet as well, so it's super fragmented and very hard to keep track on. So it's very hard to answer the question of like, "Hey, how is Bitcoin adoption going?" I don't know. I think it's kind of like the collective. I mean, the easiest data to maybe look at is all the Bitcoin companies that are existing and
Yeah.
how successful they are, and then how many more Bitcoin companies will be created in the future. That shows you about conviction level of a collective group. And if we were to look at that metric right now, I think it's going pretty well,
Mhm.
but it's still early. There's so many more people that needs to be convinced about this, and I don't know what route is going to be the one that we take. To be honest, are we going where things are increasingly getting worse, or are we going to just be able to just patiently continue to educate, continue to like have this like propaganda campaigns of like repeating and repeating and
Mhm.
repeating until people actually get to a position where they are ready to understand these concepts? Well, although I want a fast adoption of Bitcoin, I don't want the world to crumble in the process. So I think what we're doing, what you're doing, more people that are creating content and just translating content and just distributing that, I think that is the way to go. But it's going to take more time, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely ideal if we can just spread the idea peacefully and just sort of have the smooth transition, as Safety calls it. However, history tends to be a little bit unsmooth at times. So I guess hope for the best, plan for the worst kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of cultural change, let's shift gears and talk about Javier Milei, the new president of Argentina.
Yep.
Um, so as we said, he was elected 4 or 5 months ago. Um, I guess we should start a little bit with the context into which he was elected, possibly a little bit of political and economic history of Argentina. Obviously, one of the worst cases of fiat currency in recent history, right? They've been through, I had a guy on the show. Oh my goodness. Sorry that his name is escaping me right at the moment. But he walked through with the episode's titled What is Money in Argentina? And we walked through 5 hyperinflations. I think it was 5 hyperinflations that Argentina has been through in the past 50, 60 years. So what is the context into which Javier Milei is stepping into the presidency in Argentina?
Yeah, we can. So this doesn't become like a history class or whatever. I
No.
can maybe start with like a personal story, which is a great reflection of the modern Argentinian history of the past 50, 60 years. So I was born in Argentina, but I grew up in Norway. And when I was a kid, back in 1989, my family emigrated from Argentina to Norway. In 1989, the reason he emigrated was a hyperinflation because of that. Argentina had come from a very rocky transition from a military regime that were in government from 76 to 1983. So from 1983 to 1989, in those 6 years, was so much chaos. The currency changed from peso to austral, back from austral to peso. So not only did you have a currency devaluation, but they just changed the names and printed new papers with new colors. They changed the capital from Buenos Aires to a place in Viedma, which is in the province of Buenos Aires, and then they backtracked on that too. So it was like a lot of back and forth, like a lot of trying to find an identity, I guess. And all the choices that were made were wrong, and they 180'd absolutely every choice that they made. In the process of it, destroying the local currency, of course. So in 1989, it was impossible to live. My dad owned a barbecue restaurant, had a couple of cars, like comfortably middle class, lost absolutely everything. So we moved to Norway, and I kind of like grew up between Norway and Argentina throughout my childhood. As I grew older and became an adult, I looked at Argentina. Always been connected with Argentinian culture, of course, and I always visited. But I effectively grew outside of Argentina. But looking from the outside in and making regular trips, I just kept seeing the same problem. Like the same reason my family emigrated from Argentina in 1989 was the same reason people emigrated in 2000, 2001, and all the 20 years ever since. So I kept saying to myself, like, why is this happening? Why are we losing so many talented people who are supposed to stay in the country and build it up? Why are all the best doctors, the best architects, engineers, chasing better opportunities elsewhere? And I saw the reason was the same goddamn thing. Hyperinflation after hyperinflation, like you said, 10 hyperinflationary dumpster fires. No, sorry, 5 or 6 in the last 50, 60 years. Wow. So it's this like perpetual cycle that people can't get out of it. And I was like, what is going on? That led me to a rabbit hole of Austrian economics, which, I trying to understand what was happening. I obviously couldn't understand based on the education that I got from public institutes, right? No. They never teach you about inflation. Right. So I had to pick up books and learn that by myself. So basically that is Argentina in a nutshell. Just bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. And the thing is, they're not trying to be like all altruistic and they just had bad luck. These bad decisions are actually planned out, and it's very methodological because unfortunately Argentina's culture is one that is so lost and so what can I say? And they glorify the bad guy so much that that's kind of like the only way to be successful in Argentina. If you scam other people or just steal. There's actually honor in being able to steal without being caught. So if you do like super intelligent, super sophisticated stealing, that's actually a respected thing. So obviously being a politician is the number one objective for almost everyone, right? If you are a politician and you are entrenched in the political system in Argentina, you have a license to steal. And it's set up in a way that, it benefits the political class. And that started with Perón back in the 1930s, 1940s. At that time, Argentina was, I would say, one of the top 10 in terms of GDP. Better than Australia, better than New Zealand, better than Canada. There was a saying in France, riche comme un Argentin, rich as an Argentine. It was like the place to go to, and we saw a lot of immigration coming from Europe at the turn of the last century. But Perón came in the 30s and the 40s and kind of like took all of that the richness and took it for himself, spread it, distributed it within his political system, changed the whole narrative and the culture around Argentina to be more about collectivism, and he became he took a lot of left leaning arguments and baked in with a lot of fascist mechanics. I don't know if that is a good explanation. He was inspired by Mussolini and Franco in the way they in the system that they created. They basically created the state as a big enterprise, right? Which is kind of like what fascism is, right? That is the state controlling all aspects of the productive class, but they put it as an enterprise. It's like the org chart looks like an enterprise. But then
the merger of state and corporate power, I think, is the definition I've heard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then he didn't achieve that using like fascist rhetoric. He actually did that using left-leaning socialist collectivist rhetoric, which is a very interesting. If you're politically like historian, it's probably a very interesting case to study. But he achieved that with the usual. You pretend to be an altruist. You pretend to be defending people's rights, whatever, the working class, whatever, to get all the votes, and then you start the process of just impoverishing them enough so that they vote you into power for eternity because you're they're depending on you. And that went on for decades, and it became a movement even after he died, called the Peronist movement. And a lot of people are perpetuating that same rhetoric, the collectivist stuff. That throughout the years, a lot of different figures came about. The most famous one is Christina Kirchner, who is the widow of former President Nestor Kirchner, who came into power in the early aughts, right after 2001, where Argentina had a very significant financial crisis. There was capital controls, frozen bank accounts. People were depositing their savings in dollars. They lost that and got 25% of that back in pesos. It was really, really bad. He came into power right after that and stayed in power together with his wife for almost 20 years, 16 years out of the last 20. And in that process, he kind of accelerated the whole thing that Perón did for decades before the military regime started in the 70s. So basically, all those decades have been lost to many things like hyperinflation, but also a steady growing political class that just is there to rob people. And Milei came into the limelight around 2015, 2016 because he became viral. It's a perfect timing of his ideas being so different from what the ordinary what the usual conversation was, but also the fact that internet and YouTube and video content was easier to distribute, stuff like WhatsApp and Telegram and apps that you can share video with, came all at the perfect time. So the videos of Milei saying crazy stuff while screaming had that entertainment factor, but at the same time he was just a master in baking in ideas from the likes of Hayek and Mises and Rothbard, which tend to be very academical when people talk about these things. So, you kind of like alienate a lot of like ordinary people from it because it's too academical the way it's being positioned. He made it like very Argentinian, first of all. The delivery was crazy, it got your attention, and he juxtaposed these ideas with the current situation in Argentina. So that contrast that he created in the message, that was something that a lot of people resonated with. So I think all of that kind of like grew from 2015, and every year he just grew more followers, appeared in more talk shows, appeared in more TV shows, radio shows, until the point where his following was so huge that he's just like, hey, to hell with it, I'm going to run for president, and yeah, the rest is history.
That's so cool. I heard similar about Bukele's rise in El Salvador, right? It was a social media virality thing first, and then eventually the popularity was so great that he was in a position to run for office. So I like to hear that because it's demonstrating that digital technology is actually able to change culture, shift group ideology, et cetera. Hopefully in a positive direction. Like obviously it's not the case everywhere, but it does appear to have worked here in Argentina and in El Salvador. And the episode that I mentioned earlier was with Ariel Aguilar. That's episode WIM450. He went through the whole monetary history of Argentina very brilliantly. Encourage everyone to check that one out. And, the inflation and the socialism, basically the same thing, right? These are both forms of aggression against private property, right? When you print money, you're stealing. And when you enforce these fiat regulations and taxation, that's a form of socialism as well. So it's aggression against private property. And Hoppe writes in his book, A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism, it's not surprising what you said, that people honor stealing intelligently in Argentina, because Hoppe says the extent to which aggression against private property is legally authorized or celebrated is the same extent to which people will engage in it, right? There's an incentive to steal, especially if it's legally authorized, right? You can literally do it in broad daylight. Tell your victims you're doing it in their favor, right? You're clamoring to the working man to get his support while you're turning around and stealing from him through money printing, taxation, et cetera. And so this is a very deep idea, right? It's like the extent to which we violate private property is the extent to which we dissolve the social fabric, right? We dissolve the moral fabric, right? If you're rewarding stealing and now all of a sudden people start to celebrate the thief, I mean, that's not a recipe for a healthy, sustainable society. And I was also reminded of that quote. I don't know who said it, but every public election is an advanced auction on stolen goods. They're just literally getting into power to get in there and take as much as they can before, either there's a social upheaval or the next guy or girl comes in. And it's very encouraging to see a guy like Javier Milei come into office and start dismantling the state to some extent. Thanks to my friends at Swan Bitcoin for supporting the show. Swan sponsored the Sailor series, and I appreciate their support from the very beginning of the What is Money show, and I'm happy to welcome them back. Swan has grown a lot since then. They've built a full-service, Bitcoin-centric financial services company with several different offerings. With the Swan app, you can set up instant and recurring Bitcoin buys. And with this, you can get started at swan.com/breedlove. Swan also enables clients in the US to hold Bitcoin directly in an IRA account, so you can hold Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged way. Get started at swan.com/IRA. If you're looking to buy more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, check out Swan Private. You'll get concierge support for buy execution, retirement accounts, inheritance and estate planning, and access to exclusive events, research, and other content. Get started at swan.com/private. Swan Institutional provides financial services to institutions, including Bitcoin-backed lending, asset management, principal investments, Bitcoin services for financial advisors, and Bitcoin mining operations. For those new to Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Swan's Welcome to Bitcoin course at swan.com/welcome. So go to swan.com/breedlove today to get started on your Bitcoin buying journey. Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code BREEDLOVE to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code BREEDLOVE. Let's talk a bit about, Milei himself. What are the core principles of his platform? And then I guess you could get into what he's done too since he's taken office. Like, has he lived up to his word?
Yeah, Milei, he has become a politician, so you need to like treat him as a politician right now, and kind of like not, I have been following him since 2016, 2017, so I consider myself as like hopping on early on the Milei train, but I can see that things are different, right? Like he has become institutionalized, so there's a lot of things that he will say, and not as the president, but also before in the campaign. It's a lot of things that he will say to get a vote, right? Like a proper politician. So I tend to kind of like the things that he has said in the campaign to take it with a grain of salt and not necessarily like trust that he will do absolutely everything. But what Milei in the core is very, very simple. It's for freedom, for private property, and for just competition. So Argentina has been for the last 20 years, just increasingly more closed out to the rest of the world, right? There's all this, like, all the demagogues in Argentina saying, no, we got to build the Argentine industry. We can't let people from outside come into Argentina and invest because that will take jobs away and we will kill Argentinian entrepreneurship, which is a complete lie. But they use that to just add more regulations and crippling the economy even more, just to stay in power and control everything. And Milei is the antithesis of that, right? He just want to open everything. He want to like throw out a bunch of taxes, open for business, invite people from outside to invest in Argentina, and all the companies that has been expropriated previously, he want to turn them as from public to private companies. We're talking about like the airline, the oil company, all of these things that used to be private run company and they were doing perfectly fine, got in the hand of these greedy politicians who made it public, and now they're zombie companies, essentially, just running on deficits for the last 15, 20 years. So he wants to just revert all of that, basically. And it's still very early in the game, in my opinion. But I think one of the things that is very positive that he has been able to do already now is that I think it was in January or maybe February, Argentina ended its first month without a deficit for like first month in 16, 17 years, I think.
Wow.
So just simple things of like, hey, let's not spend more money that you have. Let's not, get into all these crazy loans with the IMF and whatever. Let's just like reduce all the cost and just try to just like not lose money for once. And he did that. And the process of doing that was dismantling a lot of the what I think, and a lot of people in Argentina are they agree with me, where a lot of these like indoctrination camps and all these indoctrination entities, public radio, public TV, all these organizations, women's right, feminist right, like all these organizations that are claiming to be for women and have not done anything to stop, women being murdered. All they do is paint a park bench with the LGBT colors.
Mm-hmm.
Incredibly useless organizations like that he dismantled, and a lot of money went into those entities. So he managed to do that pretty swiftly, pretty quickly, and I think that's very good from an economical standpoint, but also the fact that a lot of these like collectivist indoctrination organizations now have to actually look for a job and actually get paid for their content and actually have to compete with other people. That's great news too. That's also like a very important step in the cultural change that Argentina so desperately needs.
Yeah, it's very exciting to hear. And just by honoring those principles, like you would expect a reversion in the cultural degradation, right? Instead of rewarding stealing intelligently, like how about we reward producing intelligently, right? Not only will we all be richer as a result, but we'll also be promoting those people that are intelligent and moral and ethical, right? They're actually serving people rather than stealing from people.
Right.
So there's a very deep continuity between, economic policy and cultural status, I guess. So it'll be exciting to see what happens there. What, I guess, on the topic of perception, like what is the significance of his victory, and then how are other countries looking at this, or other media outlets? Are they perceiving this as a positive change? Or I would imagine I've read some headlines about him. They typically call it like a radical right wing president, even though he's not. He's almost decidedly apolitical in a way that he's anarcho-capitalist, very anti-state. How is he being perceived in global media?
I mean, you can guess your way to the correct answer. To be honest, it's exactly how you would expect. Obviously, legacy journalism who are very left leaning lately.
Mm-hmm.
They hate him. They say that, like you said, he's a neo-Nazi, he's a far-right extremist, he's anti-democratic, and fill in all these buzzwords that they love to use. They use the same buzzwords with Bukele. So he's getting the same treatment as Bolsonaro did, and as Trump did in his during his presidency. So it's the same playbook used by the usual suspects. But I think that just increasingly more people are paying less attention to these things. The same way the Argentine people voted Milei, they choose not to listen to the same BS anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Bukele and the way he got elected and even reelected. It's like people they have heard BS for so long that it's very easy for them to smell it. So these same rhetorics that politicians, collectivists, reporters are using is just falling on deaf ears at this point, because it hasn't been repeated for that long. But then I think the truth is more on social media, on Twitter, to be honest. I think a lot of people that are not Argentinians who have talked about Milei, one of the good takes have come on Twitter. I've not read a mainstream media article from the US or from the West that has understood not only Milei, but the complexities of Argentinian society, because you need to understand that first before understanding Milei and why he's important that he is the president now. And I think it's the same way for Bukele, right? I think a lot of people who criticize Bukele for like being anti-democratic or being authoritarian, I don't think they understand the reality of living in El Salvador when all these gangs were dominating. So there's a lot lot of important information lost from point A to B here. But of course, Milei as Bukele, when they win something, they become the current thing. So that everybody has an opinion on them all of a sudden.
Sure.
I personally, I really obviously, I hope that Milei gets to control inflation. I mean, if he actually closes down the Central Bank of Argentina, which is something that he became very famous for saying, if he actually does that, hey man, great.
Yeah.
I hope he can do it.
Yeah.
But I think he's part of the political system, and that political system is made for trade-offs and negotiations and compromises. So who knows how effective he can actually make that happen. But I think the important thing is that I will personally judge him for after 4 years is whether he has been successful in winning the cultural battle. I think more than, because I think that is something that he can control, his team can control, his followers can control. And, I'm very bullish that the fact that it's young people mostly who voted for Milei and who kind of his message is resonating too. So in 4 years from now, I hope these young people, they become more mature, and we can have more influencers, more people on Twitter spreading that message. And I hope it sticks, man. I hope that that cultural change can keep going, that Milei gets reelected and get another 4 year, and we can keep changing the way people think in Argentina, and to honor hard work and respect private property, and do things the right way, man. It's gotten to that point where Argentina just needs to reset on a lot of things, and I hope it starts with a cultural change.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff, and it is encouraging to see these mainstream media audiences are just in precipitous decline, right? They've been lied to for so long, and they're just tuning out now, especially in a post-COVID world. A lot of people were awakened during the pandemic and all of that nonsense. And we're seeing a commensurate rise in internet and social media, right? Especially now with Elon taking over Twitter. So again, back to this technological paradigm change, like it starts to change the way people see the world. And that can have a lot of follow-on effects, right? Like changes in political regimes and cultures and whatnot. I feel pretty strongly that he does need to get rid of the central bank to maintain that cultural change. Because again, if you have that institution of systemic theft at the heart of the economy, even if you deregulate a lot of other things in the market space, you still have that like core of socialism / Marxism, and that's going to reward all those bad behaviors that you described. So it's going to be like an infection on the culture. And by God, if he could get rid of that thing and we could get an economic proof for how prosperous a society would be absent a central bank, that would just be such a wonderful pattern that maybe other countries would emulate and say, oh, look, they took out their central bank and adopted. I know he wants to dollarize as part of it, but he's also kind of supportive of Bitcoin as well, just to move the needle economically by removing a central bank, to show that to the world. That would be such a win, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally.
Obviously, Bitcoiners would be very supportive of that particular point, eliminating the central bank and or adopting Bitcoin. How are Bitcoiners reacting to Milei in your estimation?
Yeah, just to piggyback on some of the things that you said, I think I totally agree with you, and I'm super bullish that that he will be able to do that. I feel like he's just scratching the surface right now with like moving all these like BS entities, all these NGOs and all these organizations that are just like parasitical. That's the easiest to remove. That's literally just a flick of the finger and they're gone. So he's starting there, and obviously the central bank is the last boss, and I hope he can just continue to like peel off the layers. But I think he's not really into gradualism too much. He's doing stuff like super accelerated. So I don't know. Hopefully he will have his shot in this term and not like in the second 4-year term after he gets reelected, which I'm sure he probably will be. But yeah, it's a different playbook, right? And it's kind of like Bukele's doing the same thing too, right? Like he's openly investing in Bitcoin. He's putting that in the treasury. He's putting a lot of infrastructure towards Bitcoin mining. So that's another playbook that a lot of other heads of states are looking at, right? And just waiting to see, okay, how it's going to pan out.
Mm.
And hopefully, both things, both Milei removing the central bank and Bukele just like building more on top of Bitcoin, is going to be something that more people will emulate. So I totally agree, and I think that's a clear signal of the paradigm shift that is really happening where it needs to happen. In terms of Bitcoiners reacting to Milei, well, I had a thread that made some waves the day after the election, because I really saw a lot of highly regarded takes from Bitcoiners, like, oh, he's not anarcho-capitalist, not real anarcho-capitalist, he's not based enough. He's like, oh, he's part of the global Zionist cabal, all these kind of like just these armchair conspiracy theorists that really have no clue about Argentina, where we come from, who Milei is, and stuff like that. So I think Bitcoiners in general have a tendency to just, talk about stuff that's not really inside their domain. We as Bitcoiners, we usually criticize a lot of people, a lot of intellectuals, for example, that has been right about one thing. And then we say, well, just because they've been right about one thing doesn't mean that they're going to be right about everything else.
Yeah.
Well, the same rule applies to us.
That's true.
Like we're right about Bitcoin. That doesn't mean we were right about realpolitik or situations of every single country. So TLDR, I saw a lot of regarded takes from Bitcoiners who don't know what they're talking about, and I addressed that in a tweet that, for my followingship, went pretty viral. But I think it's just a matter of time. If you're really interested in Milei, okay, wait until Milei is no longer the current thing and see what kind of conversations come out of it. And to be honest, after all the frenzy after Milei won the presidency died out, I haven't really heard Bitcoiners talk too much about Milei. So I think that was just another current thing that happened. That's it.
It's a great point. We do need to stay humble, right? That's part of the Bitcoin ethos now. Stay humble, stack sats. It is exciting that Milei is not embracing gradualism. I think I read this in a Rothbard book. He said that when it comes to dealing with the state, gradualism in theory is perpetuity in practice. You have to rip it out at the root. You can't just gradually curb it. It sounds like he's working towards that pretty quickly, so that is exciting. You mentioned Milei is now, he made a lot of political promises to get in office, and now he's probably facing more political realities of being in office, and therefore maybe we'll have to make some compromises on some of his promises, perhaps. Is there anything specific that concerns you?
Well, I mean, for decades, the Argentinian government has been running like a mafia, right? So, in the sense that over a long period of time, they have paid a lot of organizations, a lot of unions, a lot of organizations that have a lot of voter accounts, just to keep them happy and just have those votes guaranteed for any campaign. The first thing that Milei did was kind of like all that aid that they were receiving. They were literally receiving like a monthly allowance, all of these organizations, and they had like 10, 20,000 each of people that were just members of the union. The backlash that he has received are from these organizations first. So, they have done general strikes. They have, just protested basically. But I think Milei has been pretty badass on that, because usually in Argentina, when there are like protests, they literally cut the street. So like if you want to go to work and you're commuting or using public transport or whatever, you can't go because, almost once a week, you have like these organizations cutting the streets and not letting people go past. He has cracked down on that pretty hard, which I think is amazing, which is so needed, because you got to let these organizations think that they are not really the owners of the street, which is something that they have kind of like grown into thinking. So that has been kind of like the big I don't know, quote unquote backlash that he has received, which I think he has been handled pretty well in terms of like inside the Senate and like in terms of like getting the opposition to vote with him on certain things. He has done something called the DNU, which is kind of like a almost like a treatise of like these are all the things that needs to be done, and I'm going to do all of this in the 4 years that I'm going to be here. You guys need to vote yes or no for this, and it was a big controversy because a lot of people in the opposition, they read through those documents with like thousands of pages, and they were obviously not in favor of Milei going ahead with these things. So he needed to change a couple of things inside that treatise. I don't know exactly what those things are because it's just so much. But yeah, I think that's the kind of like the reality that Milei is up against. He just need to be vocal about what he wants to do and then try to get as much of it done, but not expecting to do all of it.
Got it. Okay, so obviously this is a complex thing he is doing, right? He is unraveling or cleaning up many decades of the state's mess. What are, I guess, can we talk a bit about the complexities of what he's dealing with? And you mentioned in your last answer that Argentina has been run like a mafia. Is he in danger potentially? Obviously, he's battling the state, the monopoly on violence, and dismantling it to some extent. Does this present real danger for Milei?
Yeah, I think you can never underestimate that particular aspect of being such a controversial politician. That comes with the game, and I think he must have a plan for that. I mean, there has been a very famous example of a lawyer who were building a case against the former president Christina Kirchner, which is one of the like emblematic figures of the modern day Peronism, and he, committed suicide, right? And that was back maybe 10 years ago now. So there are these instances of like people getting killed, or they become they take suicide or whatever, and it's never official, but everybody knows. So yeah, obviously Argentina is a nation where not only from the political side, but as a nation as a whole, like violence is unfortunately a thing that is used a lot. Insecurity in the streets, from that level to the highest level of like politician level. And I think Milei has a lot of people that literally hate him because he is such an incendiary profile. So I think he might, heighten his security when he's out in public for like regular people trying to do something to him. But from like a system angle, yeah, I mean that's also a possibility. I don't think he has been threatened or anything like that is serious, but you just never know. You just never know. It's a hard that's a hard question to answer. But Milei is going to do what he wants to do. He's not afraid. That's definitely one thing. He really has spoken out about the random threats that he gets, and he's really like showing people that he's not really afraid. So he's going to do his thing no matter what.
Well, I like the way you put that it comes with the territory. It's almost an occupational hazard in a way. And we need people like that. Taleb, in his book, I think it's an Anti-Fragile, we're most all of us are familiar with skin in the game, right? Where you are responsible for the upside and downside of your actions, basically. But there's an extension to that called soul in the game, where sometimes it's appropriate to take downside risk on behalf of other people. And this is especially true for people in leadership or, investigative journalist positions, things like this. You need to stick your neck out there and tell the truth. Like if there's a fraud and you see the fraud and you don't declare a fraud, then you're almost complicit in the fraud kind of thing. So it's encouraging to see people like that sticking their neck out there for what they believe and taking real action, because the world, what else are we going to do to move the world in the right direction, right? If you don't have people like that taking those steps, taking those risks, then we're only going to go backwards.
Sticking your neck out might be the thing you need to do, though, in order for, obviously you need to do it to, distribute your message if you're like the antithesis of some legacy institution or legacy system. But I think becoming a public figure and actually becoming famous, or just like trying to be as famous as you can, is a kind of protection as well, right? Because if they assassinate you, I mean, and you're famous already, your ideas are going to live on forever. So that might be, something that the opposition don't want to do. If you're relatively unknown, like that poor lawyer who committed suicide, he wasn't a public figure, and I think he probably thought about that and said, well, if there's nobody knows who he is, only we know inside the system. We know because he's a litigator, and but the public doesn't know. And I think people who are like that, they tend to become victim of hitting hits like that.
That's a really unique perspective. I'd never thought of it that way. That the public figure can actually offer you some protection. So
as an invisible shield.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it works for Milei, and let's hope he stays true to his political promises. They are radical. He's carrying around a chainsaw, saying he's going to take a chainsaw to the state. I think he said he's going to detonate the central bank. I mean, using extremely strong language. I hope he doesn't actually detonate the central bank, but if he could just uninstall it, that would be great. Maybe he could do a controlled demolition after it's, all the people are cleared out. That would be fine.
Something about Latin American politics that give you those things, like I think he went on a TV show and they had prepared a piñata for him with
yeah, I saw that.
The central bank, and he was like blindfolded and ate it. Like, I think there's a Twitter account that is only about Latin American politics, and they show like videos of like campaign videos and stuff like that, and it's a show, man. That's what these people are in the end. They're actors playing a role in the show. That is entertaining for all of us, and we're definitely watching. But let's hope Milei at least can change the culture and the way people think. And well, if all these political promises also gets realized, fine. But I'm here for the cultural change more than anything.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's an intrinsically performative dimension to politics, right? Your rhetoric and all that, and I guess the temptation is to maybe use that as just a means to an end, right? Use that as a means to power and wealth, which the vast majority of politicians do. But you can be a politician with principles, right? You can be a politician that supports private property and freedom and human rights and things like this. So let's what else can we do? Hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Yep.
Fernando, thank you, man. This has been a very interesting conversation. Interesting to see that perceptions are changing in the world. I wonder to what extent Bitcoin's rise maybe is somehow at the edges related to the popularity of Javier's ideas. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anyone can know the answer to that, but it is interesting to see these things happening simultaneously. And then obviously with Bukele as well. So let's hope it keeps happening.
Yeah, man, it's all connected. I mean, the world is a chaotic place where a lot of things are moving at the same time. I think if we are able to draw some lines to tell ourselves like things are going in the right direction, the sentiment is changing, the narrative is changing, then yeah, that's a positive thing. So happy to talk about it and discuss it with you, man. Thank you for the invitation, and it's an honor to have just chatted with you.
Yeah, so great to have you. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, on Twitter or X, my handle is Based Layer. So like base layer with based. And Bitcoin Perception is bitcoinperception.com. It's free to subscribe. You get a research report every week, and you also have access to a dashboard with the data that I use to create these reports if you want to dive in for yourself. So bitcoinperception.com, at Based Layer on Twitter. And if you're interested in what we do at Blockstream, at blockstream.com.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, man.